Hello and welcome. The purpose of this video is to walk you through how to set up a graph in Google Sheets. All right, so let's go ahead and get some sample data entered. I would generally have this written out in my sheets with my independent variable and my dependent variable. I'm just going to plug in some sample numbers, 9, 10, and maybe the measurements I took went up every so often. Maybe this one was exactly 10, 11, 15. Of course, you would have to measure your dV at whatever intervals you set up for your independent variable. So maybe you're measuring every 1 minute, for example, and you are measuring these different amounts and just plugging in some numbers so that we can set up a graph. You'll notice this is set up for me so that it's entering the same number of decimal places. The way that I did that in Sheets was by using this button here. So I can adjust so that all of my data has exactly the same number of decimal places. So this is going to be dependent on whatever tool I used and however many decimal places it reported. So if it gave me 2 decimal places, I need to show both decimal places. Even if my measurement was 0.00, it was exact, I would still need to show that. If it gave me 1 decimal place, I would show that. Your decimal places should be consistent throughout your data, and also if you're using uncertainty throughout your uncertainty. All right, let's go ahead and graph our data. So I'm going to highlight the data that I want to graph. Whatever I want to be on my x-axis is going to be on the left. This is my x-axis. You don't need to write this in your chart. I'm just going to write it so that you can keep track. And whatever you want to be on your y-axis needs to be to the right. So I have this set up correctly in 2 columns. I'm going to go to Insert, Chart. Now, Sheets went ahead and tried to guess for me what kind of chart I wanted. Line chart looks tempting, but this is not actually what I want for a science class. I don't want each point connected exactly. What I really want, I'm going to go over here to Chart Type, click on the drop-down menu. I want a scatter plot where it's specifically graphing for me each individual point. This is the type of graph that we use in science class. Now, you'll see that it already pulled names for me based on what I entered here. So it's saying DV versus IV. That's the general form you want your title to be in. But we can also make this more specific. So if you want to change the title, you're just going to go over here to Chart Editor, and not in Setup, but in Customize. There's Chart Style. We've already dealt with that. Chart and Axes Titles. So Chart Title. Maybe my dependent variable was height of a plant, for example, versus time. I can update that here. This is just an example. Maybe this is time measured in days, height of a plant measured in centimeters. Whatever your experiment is, you would put in your information. This is just an example. All right. So now maybe I see, okay, I just put DV here as kind of a placeholder. I can update this. So I'm again in chart and axes titles. I've now chosen vertical axis title. So here I have time in days. If I had an uncertainty, I would also put that here. So I'm going to put the units, and then I might put plus or minus 0.5 days, for example. If you don't have an uncertainty, you wouldn't put anything there. Axis title, independent variable. Oops, sorry, I think I switched these. Let's go back. My vertical axis was actually my height of my plant in centimeters. And then my horizontal axis title, this is where I had time. All right. So I have this set up. This is looking good. There's a lot you can do to customize. You can, of course, change the font, change the color, change the format, all of that. But for now, this is looking good. I'm pretty happy with this. Some other things you might want to do. You can change the colors if you want. You can change the fill color. If you click on these points exactly, You can actually format the data point and you can change the size, you can change the shape. That's just changing one shape, but if you double click, you should, in that same formatting, you're actually able to change all of the shapes. If I have them all selected, and I'm going to go back to chart style. So there's a lot of options you can do, and those can be helpful for different things, but we're just going to leave it how it was and kind of continue moving here. If you did want to change all of them at once, you could have them all selected, but we're just going to go with the default. All right, so under the series option, this is where there's really a lot of options for you. So you can see I was just playing around with if this is a circle or something other than a circle, but there's a lot more that's going on here. So in addition to fill color and capacity and shape and all of that, I can add these three important things. So just to review where this is under, if I double click on my chart, right click, edit, chart style. That's how I bring up this menu. So chart style, that's not really the one I want. I want series, and I have some options here. One thing I can add is error bars. You can do standard deviation, percent, constant, or none, depending on the type of error that you have. And that's going to depend on your experiment. So I can put those in. Let's say I have on my y-axis an error of plus or minus 1, or I think, yeah, plus or minus 1, sure. In Sheets, you can actually only do vertical error bars. So if you need horizontal error bars, you're going to need to switch over to Excel. Also, if you need error bars that have different amounts in each point, you would need Excel for that as well. You can add data labels. That's often not very helpful, but another option here. The other thing we often use in this section is something called a trend line. This gives me the general pattern of all of the data. This gives me a best fit line that best describes the pattern of all of this data. I can actually have it show under label, I can have it show the equation so that I know the equation and the relationship between these two things in terms of y equals mx plus b. R squared tells me how well my trend line fits my data. If it's close to 1, that means the best fit line is pretty accurate. So all of this, again, we find under series, all of this is also very helpful for graphing in science class. There's lots of other options here. You can add a legend if you have multiple lines. Your horizontal axes, you can reformat. Sometimes it's helpful to change if you're using like a log scale, for example. You can set that in here. You can set min and max values if you need to start at 0, 0. You could add some labels. So all of this can be really helpful. Vertical axis has the same sort of thing. Another thing sometimes people find helpful is adding more, both the major and minor trend lines. So I can do that for the vertical and horizontal axis to give myself more of a grid. Sometimes that can be really helpful in terms of picturing what's going on. So all of those options I'm finding under customize. Again, series is where you find all of that good science analysis that we might want to do, like error bars and trend lines. All right, I hope that helped. Talk to your teacher as you have questions, and thanks for watching.